Mobile Nation's Russell Holly with us now. Russell, thanks for joining us. So federal prosecutors alleging that these two former Apple employees took secretive data, planning to go and work with Chinese competitors. To what extent does that show our larger fight with China about IP?
I think this has a tremendous amount to do with the kind of IP problems that we're having abroad. You know, Apple faces a lot of competition when it comes to the way that it manufactures things. You know, a lot of it, especially when it comes to its phones, these processors are made entirely in-house just for Apple equipment. And one of the things that it does so well is that kind of optimized feel where it doesn't really require as much power to be as efficient as some of the other processors. So being able to take that information elsewhere is incredibly valuable. On the other hand, most of the competition that we're seeing in China when it comes to processors are already matching kind of feature for feature what it is that these Apple processors are capable of. So I'm curious what specifically is being taken back. That part is still unclear.
Yeah, some I read was about self-driving car technology, but then to your point, others were, let's call them blueprints for chips and other products. But I actually want to pick up there because this chip issue is definitely affecting a domestic suit. Apple suing a former employee, one who started a competing server chip company. And Apple says basically some of the technology that this person developed, he developed while he was working at Apple, and then Apple also says the worker was recruiting other Apple employees so that when he launched his company, he had a ready-made staff. Could you argue that big picture, especially for domestic companies, I mean, the history of Silicon Valley and the chip industry in particular is a long saga, right, of teams of engineers leaving one company to start another, some saying whether or not Apple wins or loses this case, that it's essentially pushing against its own industry's DNA. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think it kind of goes a little deeper than that, because while the history of, consumer tech in Silicon Valley certainly is, you leave one company and you start your own, more recently, say within the last 15 years, the story has changed ever so slightly, where you leave that company and you start this organization in order to then get bought back by that other company. And one of the big accusations here was that this guy left in order to, create this idea so that Apple would kind of reabsorb him and he'd kind of, make the money that goes off of that. I think the really fascinating detail from the lawsuit so far, however, is the counter accusation from the guy who started this company, saying that the only way that Apple would have known that there was this communication going on between him and his coworkers was if Apple was illegally collecting text messages from his employees, and that's fascinating.
Yeah,
right.
But I heard, the employees saying, not necessarily denying that they were working on this project or recruiting, but they were like, well, Apple read our text messages, which the company shouldn't really do. Yeah, to your point, it's a little messy. All right, listen, while you're here getting away from Apple, I just want to ask you quickly about AT&T testing out this new form of commercial, so pause ads basically, which run 30 seconds after you hit the pause button. This is all according to Variety. What do you think of this idea?
So this is kind of a retake on something that Hulu's already doing, where you press pause on something on Hulu if you have kind of the lowest tier plan.